Everybody in the room had already decided the dog did it. 3 men in range polos kept talking over one another, while a young handler sat half-folded against a gray plastic chair, one hand clamped to his own forearm, blood still wet where it had run into the cuff and turned the fabric dark. Rook stood 6 feet away on a short leash, still as poured concrete, ears pricked, eyes locked on the handler, and then past him toward the hollow clatter coming from a metal kennel gate. Somebody kept bumping with a boot. He hated that sound. The noise got into him the way gravel got into a wound. It stayed there and kept working. Mara came through the annex door, chewing the last of her cinnamon gum, the flavor already going flat, and took in the whole scene in one sweep. Blame first, noise second. Evidence buried somewhere under the noise. A woman from admin said, "That dog went for him," like she needed the sentence to harden before anybody challenged it. Mara did not answer. Her thumb found the strap of her watch and rubbed once, then twice, the way it always did when a room started trying to outrun the truth. The handler's breathing was too fast for outrage and too shallow for a man who had only been nipped. Sweat had pasted grit to the lower leg of his uniform pants. There was a dark smear on one knee that did not belong on a clean training floor. "Don't move your arm," Mara said, already dropping down in front of him. "And stop talking for 10 seconds if you want me to keep you useful." She touched the torn sleeve first. People always looked at the blood. Fabric told the truth earlier. The rip ran long and shallow along the outer forearm instead of punching in where canine pressure should have crushed and held. No paired punctures, no deep arc, no tearing from a shake, just cloth dragged hard across something rough and narrow. Then the wound opened underneath by force that had skimmed rather than clamped. Mara peeled his hand back. Bruising had already started, a dirty bloom spreading under the skin, but it sat wrong for a bite. Too linear, too directional. End. Blood had run down across the ulnar side of the wrist, not from above where a jaw would have closed if the story these people wanted were true. She looked at his exposed palm. Ground grit in the heel. Fine metallic dust at the base of the thumb. He had hit something, grabbed something, or gone down trying not to. "What did he snag on?" she asked, without looking up. One of the men said, "Ma'am." The dog lunged. She finally gave him a glance. "Then your dog forgot how teeth work." Silence hit the room for a beat. Not long enough. Rook shifted his weight once and stared toward that kennel gate again, body tight, not guilty, alert. Entirely different thing. Mara felt the old sentence move through her head in its familiar, hard voice. Don't ever let the first explanation become the operating truth. That was when Noah Voss came in from the interior hall, with a clipboard tucked under one arm and the look of a man who had already started writing the version he preferred. Mid-30s. Clean haircut. Pale tan line from his eye protection, still ghosting one side of his face. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room bent toward him anyway. "Doctor," he said, glancing at Mara's hands instead of her face. "If the animal made contact, I need that noted now so we can isolate and suspend before this gets out of hand." There it was. Not concern. Sequence. Liability. Chain control. Mara slid 2 fingers gently along the handler's forearm until he hissed. The pain point landed near a fresh scrape buried under the blood. "What gets out of hand," she said, "is closing the wrong door first." Voss held still, annoyed but not sloppy. She gave him that much. Men like him survived on tidy categories and reports that ended before noon. Range safe, dog fault. Handler treated. Case closed. It would have been neat. Neat was poison on a live site. "This wasn't a bite," Mara said. "Not from him." She tipped her chin toward Rook without taking her hand off the wound. The room pushed back all at once. Somebody started on policy, somebody else on witness statements. The handler tried to say he had felt teeth, then stopped halfway through, as if his own memory had just snagged on something sharp. Mara smelled hot copper from the blood, old disinfectant from the annex, and under both of those, the baked, dirty scent drifting in through every opening in the building. Desert dust, not kennel dust. She looked down again at the grime on his pant leg, the angle of the scrape, the tiny glitter caught in the threads of his sleeve. Metal, concrete, maybe grated housing. Not a dog. Rook gave one low breath through his nose and fixed on the corridor beyond the waiting area where the hollow metal sound hit again. This time, the handler flinched before it landed. Not fear of a dog. Recognition. Mara rose slowly, careful not to waste the moment. "Whatever cut him," she said, "wasn't in this room when you started yelling?" Voss's jaw tightened. "Then where?" Mara looked past him toward the sealed door, leading deeper into range support, and felt the gum lose the last of its flavor. That was the bad part. She didn't know yet. She only knew the blood had come from somewhere nobody in this room had bothered to look. Voss turned before anybody else could fill the silence with bad guesses. "Outside," he said, clipped and controlled. "Doctor, you too." Mara handed the handler off with 2 fast instructions and a look that told the nearest medic not to get creative. Rook moved with her into the corridor, his nails ticking once on concrete before the sound vanished under the hard mechanical hum of the HVAC. The air out there was colder than the annex, and wrong in a different way, metallic and dry with a faint ozone bite, as if overheated wiring had been sweating behind the walls. The cold did not feel clean. It felt manufactured, forced, pressed into the building to hide what heat would otherwise tell. Fluorescent light flattened everything. The corridor ran narrow and pale and institutional, with a service cart parked halfway down, as if somebody had abandoned a thought in the middle of it. Eli Mercer stood beside that cart, with one hand braced against the edge, and most of his attention on the floor instead of on them. That was Eli. Ground first, people after. Turnover tags were clipped in bundles at one end. A coil of cable sat beside 2 orange water jugs and a hard case that had been opened and shut too many times. His left shoulder hung a little lower than the right. His right knee was locked a little too straight, the old stiffness plain as print if you knew to look. Mara knew. Rook knew too. The dog eased half a step toward him, then stopped and watched. Eli lifted his eyes last, deadpan as weathered steel. "You done proving the dog smarter than the room?" he asked. Mara spat the dead gum into a crumpled receipt in her pocket. "Not done, just started." He nodded once and tipped his chin toward a dark smear near the baseboard that nobody coming out of the annex had bothered to notice. Blood, but older by a shade. A partial boot print cut through it and dragged off toward the secured side corridor that led to range support access. Next to that sat a streak of pale grit and 2 tiny flakes of yellow paint. Mara crouched. The grit was finer than what had come in on the handler's pants. Lighter, too, mixed with a sparkle she did not like. Not office dust, exterior dust, wind-blown range dust. The hallway was sealed, climate-controlled, cold enough to raise bumps along the backs of her forearms. That dust should not have been there at all. Eli finally looked at her directly. "Turnover count was wrong before your boy got cut," he said. 1 utility key signed back in. Cage panel still showing manual open. I went to find the eval lead before I touched anything. And Voss came out behind them in time to hear that and stop dead. Mara watched it land on him. Not fear exactly, the quicker thing under it. Calculation. What this became if it moved from training mishap to missing body on his watch. Eli rolled his stiff knee once, a small, ugly motion, then pointed down the hall with 2 fingers. Radio check missed from the old lanes 13 minutes ago. They said probably dead spot. He let the probably hang there like something rotten. Maybe. Or maybe somebody was busy, bleeding on the wrong floor. Rook lowered his head and pulled air over the seam under the secured door, then went still again. "Captain," Mara said, standing, "your clean story just got worse." Voss kept his face tight, but she could see the fight in the order he looked at things. Eli's cart, the boot smear, the dog, the secured door, back to her. He wanted a version where each item could be boxed off from the others. Separate issue, separate report, separate blame. That was how institutions stayed calm long enough to fail in sequence. "We do not have confirmation of a missing team," he said. "What we have is one injured handler, one unverified access discrepancy, and a support corridor that should have been cleared already." He put weight on should've. That was his safe ground. Mara stepped closer until he either had to lower his voice or make a scene. "You also have range dust in a sealed hall, a panel opened by hand, a dog alerting off this door, and a wound your people tried to pin on the nearest convenient target." Eli scratched once at the stubble on his jaw and said, very mild, "I know when not to beat her in an argument." It was almost nothing. That was why it worked. Voss flicked a look at him, then at the access log clipped to the cart. Mara could feel the concession forming before he made it. Not moral clarity. Just the math of what happened if he ignored this and got punished later by someone with sharper paperwork. Voss exhaled through his nose and made the decision like it physically hurt. Limited scope. He said, "You, Mercer, the dog, no wider alarm yet. You find me a body, a breach, or anything that turns this into a shutdown, I own that call. Until then, this stays contained." Mara hated the contained part and took the rest. It was enough to move. Eli reached for one of the orange water jugs, his knee hitching again, and Rook planted himself beside the secured door, as if he had been waiting for the humans to stop wasting time. Somewhere past the concrete and steel, deeper in the old lanes, something gave off a dull metallic knock and then went quiet. Voss heard it. Mara saw that too. His face changed by half an inch. That was all. Enough. The range he needed to call empty wasn't empty anymore. The briefing room sat on the edge of the range, like somebody had bolted a cheap office box onto the mouth of an oven. Heat came through the narrow wired window in flat, hard sheets, bright enough to turn the dust hanging in the air into glitter nobody wanted. Mara could taste grit at the back of her tongue. It coated her teeth and sat on her gums and made the inside of her mouth feel chalked over. Voss stood at the front with a laminated site map pinned under one hand and a stack of forms under the other, moving through both too fast. He was not briefing them because he believed in the mission. He was briefing them because a short briefing was a better legal object than no briefing at all. "Limited search," he said. "No detours, no heroics, no contact unless you have to. If you see anything that looks like ordnance, you back off. Recognize, retreat, report." He said the last three words like they irritated him. Mara watched the way he kept glancing at the clock above the door instead of at the map. Shutdown risk. Audit trail. Who had authorized what and for how long? Eli leaned one hip against the wall, bad knee loose until it wasn't, his eyes on the taped corners of the map. Rook sat at Mara's left boot, quiet, one ear tipped toward the door, listening past the human part of the morning. The room smelled of old paper, hot dust, and the stale plastic odor cheap offices got when the air conditioning never quite won. By the time Voss finished, the inside of Mara's mouth felt like she had been chewing chalk instead of gum. They stepped out through the rear service door into a blast of white heat that flattened the world for a second. No wind. That was the first ugly thing. Just still air holding the smell of hot rock, old oil, scorched weeds, and sun-baked metal. The deployment point was a patch of cracked concrete beside a chain-link gate and two faded bollards, with the range opening out beyond it in bands of dirt, scrub, berm, and hard glare. Eli took the water jug from his shoulder and set it down with care. Rook came forward beside them and changed shape without moving much. Head lower, neck longer, ears up and slightly canted, weight easing onto his front legs, not excitement. A question. Mara followed his line and saw nothing at first except distance and shimmer. "Same rule out there," Voss said behind them. "If it doesn't look right, you don't touch it." Mara kept her eyes on the ground. That ever worked on this place? Voss let it go. Eli hooked a thumb toward a shallow dip, crossing the lane far ahead, almost invisible under the light, unless you were looking for contour instead of color. Water runs there when it runs, he said. And when it does, it doesn't ask permission. Seed noted. Root problem. Not yet. Soon. They moved out slow for the first 100 yards, not for show, just careful. The heat rode on them like another body. Mara let the map stay folded in her cargo pocket and trusted her eyes over printed lines. The safe lane had the wrong skin on it. Dust should have sat loose in that temperature, feathered by tire marks, wind and boot drag. Instead, a fresh pale layer had been smeared over the track in a thin, even film, as if somebody had tried to sweeten the surface and missed the fact that the desert hated symmetry. Mara crouched and touched 2 fingers to it. Fine top dust over coarser grit, recently disturbed. The powder rode her fingertips too easily, and beneath it the packed layer kicked back a faint glitter when the sun shifted. Not glass exactly. Something reflective in the mix. Enough to bend what the eye trusted at distance. Eli came down beside her, slow because of the knee, and studied the lane without speaking. Off to the right sat another clue, half hidden by scrub. A low drainage cut no deeper than a man's shin. Dry now. Ugly in shape anyway. Beyond a rise, she caught the square shadow of a steel service enclosure. Maybe the utility cage Eli had flagged in the hall. Access. There it was. End quote. Rook stopped dead, staring not at the cage but a yard left of it, nose working at air nobody else could read. One ear twitched, then the other. Mara filed that too. Voss had followed them out just far enough to protect the fiction that he still controlled the perimeter. You seeing something concrete? He called. Or are we still in the realm of instincts and hunches? Mara rose and dusted her fingers once against her pants. The powder left a pale streak. I'm seeing a lane somebody tried to make look cleaner than it is. She pointed with 2 fingers. Fresh layover on the surface. Wrong texture. Drain cut there. Utility enclosure there. And the dog doesn't like something near that line. Voss stared at the track as if it might reorganize itself into a sentence he preferred. He wanted a visible breach, a padlock cut open, a body in plain sight, something he could name without having to explain why he had waited. Eli spared him by saying, "Wheel marks too." He was right. Once Mara looked from lower down, she saw the faintest compression under the dust. Not clean treads. More like weight had crossed and then been brushed over. Enough to bother her. Enough to bother Eli. Mara hooked a hand toward the gate behind them. Once that closes, outside gets farther away than it looks. Voss's mouth tightened. He gave a sharp nod and stepped back. The chain-link gate rolled on tired wheels, rattled once, then clanged shut behind them with a sound Rook hated and Mara trusted. Safe had just become a direction instead of a fact. By the time they reached the utility cage, the sun had climbed into that dead white part of the sky where shadows quit being useful. The cage sat behind a low service rise, square and ugly, chain link wrapped around steel posts anchored in cracked concrete, the whole thing stained with rust and baked hard by years of weather. Mara smelled blood before she saw where it had pooled. Not much of it fresh, enough drying in the heat to turn metallic and sweet and foul all at once. Dust had glued itself to the dark streaks and built little ridges like dried riverbanks. Somewhere inside the cage, a man made a sound so thin it barely qualified as a groan. Rook stopped hard enough that the lead snapped taut against Mara's hand. No bark. Just a full-body freeze and that forward draw in his shoulders, every line in him reading danger and human scent and something else layered under it. Fear. Recent fear. Eli lifted a hand without looking back, asking for quiet. Mara gave it to him. The utility box, mounted inside the fence, hung open an inch. One hinge bent. A keypad housing sat cracked along one edge. Somebody had worked this place fast and sloppy, then stayed longer than they had planned. Mara went in low. The groan came again, from behind a rusted cabinet shoved against the back wall of the enclosure. The man behind it was maybe 30, maybe younger under the dirt, one arm tied high with his own torn overshirt, the knot twisted wrong and soaked through. His face had gone the color people got when their blood pressure was trying to quit, lips dry, eyes glassed over but tracking. Good, still here. Mara dropped beside him and did not waste a second asking how he felt. "Can you hear me?" He blinked once. She cut the improvised tie with her shears, saw the wound underneath, and felt her whole brain narrow into sequence. Severe injury across the upper arm. Not heavy flow now, but he had lost a lot earlier, and the banding from the shirt had done more to damage the area than stop the loss. She stripped a tourniquet free, slid it high, cinched until the skin bunched and the man sucked air through his teeth. "Priority is what can kill you first," she said. "We stabilize, then we move. Pressure, dressing, next." Quick check of chest rise, no obvious puncture. Pulse rapid and trashy under her fingers, heat on top of blood loss. Eli knelt on the other side, giving her exactly enough space. Rook stayed at the cage opening, rigid, watching outward. Mara lifted the patient's chin just enough. "Anybody else alive?" His mouth worked. "Two," he whispered. "Inside." That was all she let him spend. Once he stopped trying to talk, the rest of the cage started talking for him. Zip-tie tails on the floor, fresh scrape marks across the concrete where the cabinet had been dragged, grease fingerprints on the inside of the panel door. Somebody had forced him to kneel close enough to the keypad to work it under pressure, then shoved him aside when they got what they needed. Not ransom, utility. Mara looked at the broken housing and the half-exposed wiring behind it, then at the man's left hand. 2 fingernails split back, knuckles skinned raw, repeated entries, failed attempts. Maybe a sequence. Maybe timed access. "They needed you to open this," she said. His eyes moved once. "Enough." "Didn't know all of it," he breathed. "Only first panel." They kept asking for the rest. Eli turned and scanned the horizon through the mesh. "Copper thieves don't usually babysit a control cage." "These aren't just copper thieves," Mara said. "They're grabbing anything that resells, and they think system access makes it faster." She followed the dragged dust trail leading out the rear service gap and saw a second set of prints over the first, heavier, deeper, at the toe. One person half carrying another. Rook's ears cut left, then right. He took one step backward from the opening instead of forward. Root refusal. Something out there sat wrong. Mara believed him before she knew why. The patient tried to curl around the pain and nearly passed out doing it. Mara caught his shoulder, checked the dressing, then looked up at Eli. "He doesn't stay here." Eli nodded once. The problem was math. They had one living casualty who needed shade, fluids, evac, and real hands on him inside the hour. They had at least 2 more bodies somewhere deeper in the range structure. They had a captain back at the line who wanted this contained until reality made that impossible. Eli looked at the blood trail, leaving the cage, then back toward the route they had used to get in. "I can drag him to the cutoff point and raise Voss on the short-range set," he said. "Maybe get a litter team moving without saying too much." Mara hated maybe, but she hated wasting time more. "Do it," she said. "Keep him alive. Keep Voss nervous. Don't let him shut the gate on us." She turned to the patient again. "You did enough." His eyes rolled toward the broken panel. "Blue box," he whispered. "They wanted the blue box." That landed harder than it should have. Not copper money, not a smash and grab. The blue box was the kind of thing that turned local theft into a regional security problem if the wrong hands got it open. Mara rose, her hand already finding the watch strap again. Eli got his shoulder under the casualty and started the ugly, careful lift. Rook held the opening until they were moving, then came back to Mara's side. 3 in had just become 2 going forward. Less than safe. Still not optional. The ground ahead looked like mercy. After the cage, after the blood and the heat, and Eli hauling one half-dead man back toward whatever help Voss would allow. The lane opened out in front of Mara, and Rook, smooth as poured plaster. No scrub breaks, no busted concrete teeth, no twisted junk catching the light, just a pale, clean strip running between two low berms toward the dark block shape of the abandoned complex. Noon sat over the range like a hammer. Heat rolled up off the earth in sheets that bent distance and made edges swim. Mara could feel the sun through her shirt, could feel sweat crawling down between her shoulder blades and drying almost as fast as it formed. The air had no softness left in it. Breathing felt like dragging hot paper into her lungs. Rook paced a half step ahead, tongue just visible now. Not sloppy yet, but working harder. Mara unscrewed the travel bowl from the side of the canteen, gave him a quick pour, watched him drink, watched his ribs move, then looked up again at that strange, beautiful lane. Too even, too empty. In country like that, nothing honest ever looked that clean. She moved toward it anyway, slow, her eyes working from surface to edges to distance and back again. The logic was easy to love. The ugly ground to the right ran broken and narrow, cut by rock teeth and old service debris. The left side fell off into a shallow dead pocket where heat shimmer sat thick enough to blur depth. The middle lane offered speed, sightline, less time in the open, less time cooking under the sun, less time for whoever had taken the blue box to get farther ahead. That alone made Mara distrust it. Easy routes had a way of advertising themselves to the tired. Rook came up beside her, then stopped. Not a hard stop, subtle. One front paw planted, the other hovering for a fraction before settling back. His ears tipped forward, then out. His weight shifted away from the lane without his body fully turning. Refusal without drama. Mara followed the line of his stare. The surface kicked back, a white glare sharp enough to make her squint. Under it, she caught flashes that were there and gone, like fish turning in dark water. Not movement, reflection. Her mouth went dry in a new way. She crouched and studied the edge, where the pretty lane met the ugly shoulder. Dust lay differently there. On the clean strip, it had been spread. Off to the side, it had gathered naturally in seams, pockets, and tiny wind-cut bowls. She should have trusted that and stopped. Instead, she took one more step, wanting the proof before she paid the cost. Her right boot came down, gravel cracking under the sole, and something in the light changed, not outside her, inside. The body math, the small recoil in her calf, the way Rook sucked back at the leash, and the hair along his shoulders lifted. Mara froze mid-transfer with her weight still divided. One more inch forward, and she would have committed. She looked down past the glare and finally saw it. First, the round shoulder of old metal half buried under the chalky film. Then, another shape farther in. Then, another. Each one erased until the sun hit from the wrong angle, and each one ringed by stones that had been brushed just enough to make the surface red smooth from standing height. UXO. Maybe old practice remnants. Maybe range junk with enough bite left to take a leg off. Didn't matter. The lane had been dressed to read safe from a standing eye line, range glass, not magic. Just glare, reflective grit, fresh layover, and a human brain greedy for the easy route. Cold sweat cut through the heat under Mara's arms. Her pulse gave one hard slam. She eased her boot back the way it had come, slow enough to hear each pebble shift, tiny stone against tiny stone. Dust slipping, weight unwinding, one fraction at a time. The sound seemed huge. Her calf trembled once and then held. Rook did not move. He watched her the way working dogs watched explosives techs and door teams, like he understood that motion itself had become the argument. Mara got her foot clear, backed another step, and let the air back into her lungs in a thin, controlled stream. Pretty means dead, she muttered, the words rough in her own mouth. Then, meaner and truer, the ground that looks good kills you. The ugly ground lets you live. Once she backed clear, The whole thing became impossible not to see. The lane had not been cleaned. It had been cosmetically corrected. Fresh, pale dust over a harder surface. Reflective fragments mixed in just enough to blow out detail. The kind of quick lie men told when they wanted pursuit slowed, redirected, or bloodied without firing a shot. Mara stood there breathing through the spike in her nerves, while Rook stared at the false lane like he wanted permission to hate it harder. The route they had been handed by the terrain was gone. No way was she walking him through that shimmer field. Not with his paws, not with her luck, not with somebody ahead counting on blind followers. She scanned right again. Broken service trench, narrow cut between concrete and rusted wall sections, shade in pieces, not enough to trust. Bad footing, tight approach. The least good choice in a world that had run out of good ones. The complex waited beyond it, all dark openings and heat-drunk angles. Mara checked the pistol riding high against her side, then looked down at Rook. "Guess we do it the ugly way." He shifted once, ready now that the lie had a shape. Behind them the open range offered no cover, and behind that sat the gate and Voss, and safe on paper. In front of them was the complex. Mara took the narrow cut and felt the story close around her. The complex swallowed heat without cooling anything. Mara came in through a cracked side opening, with Rook tight against her leg, and the light behind them broken into strips across the floor. Inside smelled like old dust, hot wiring, stale sweat, and that same sharp ozone tang she had caught in the corridor hours earlier, only stronger now, trapped under concrete and corrugated metal. Half the overhead fixtures were dead. The one still working buzzed, weak and ugly, throwing broken bars of white across a long service room lined with empty racks, cable trays, and gutted control housings. Somewhere deeper in the structure, metal knocked once, then twice, then stopped. Not wind, human hands. Mara paused long enough for her eyes to settle. Rook did not freeze this time. He narrowed out, head low, ears angled, reading layers in the dark. A shape slipped across a doorway ahead and vanished. Too fast for panic, too casual for trained. Somebody moving with a load, and thinking he still had time, Mara touched 2 fingers to Rook's shoulder and pointed low. He flowed left into shadow without a sound, disappearing along the wall where a row of empty housings made a shallow channel. The air inside felt hotter than outside in a meaner way, cooked and airless. Good place for bad decisions. The first thing she noticed was how messy they were. People who knew just enough to be dangerous always left little insults behind. A pry bar abandoned beside a stripped panel, fresh gouges where somebody had rushed a tool and slipped, cable jackets skinned open for copper and left hanging like dead snakes, shoe prints in the dust crossing one another instead of stacking clean. 3, maybe 4 bodies had moved through earlier. 2 now, maybe. 1 hauling gear, 1 staying back to cover or panic or both. Mara edged along the right wall and looked through a broken frame into the loading bay at the center of the structure. That room finally gave her the map. The loading bay opened wide and low, with sunlight stabbing through holes in the roof in hard white columns. A concrete support pillar stood a little left of center. The far exit door sat beyond it on the back wall, half open and washed in glare. To the right of that pillar, in one shaft of sun, a man had the blue box in both hands, smaller than she had expected, maybe the size of a lunch cooler, riding in a padded carrier with 2 cables hanging from one side. At the base of the pillar, half in shadow, a hostage lay slumped on his hip with 1 wrist bound and his shoulders still moving shallowly. 10 feet right of the hostage, near the pillar's open side and facing the far exit, another man stood with a pistol held too low and too loose, his attention split between the door and the body at his feet. Mara was on the right-hand approach, screened by the broken frame and a line of gutted racks. Rook was left, invisible in shadow, and angled to hit the gunman's blind side if she drove him off balance. The far exit was the runner's line. The pillar Was the hostage's bad luck? The blue box was already moving, and if they cracked that box, this stopped being copper theft and turned into a catastrophic regional security failure. No speeches, no warnings, no room. She moved on the man with the pistol before he understood the room had changed. One step, then another, short and ugly and close. He half turned at the scrape of her boot and got one breath into whatever he meant to say before the fight collapsed into impact. He hit the concrete hard. The gun came up, and she smashed into the line of it, feeling the hot, hard shape of the slide drag her palm as his wrist buckled and his shoulder slammed the pillar. He was strong and scared and all wrong in the body. Not trained panic, but raw, clumsy panic. The kind that overcommitted everything and left nothing in reserve. He tried to muscle the pistol straight back toward her ribs instead of clearing space first. The shot never went clean. It broke sideways into metal and blew the bay apart with noise. Rook hit from the blind side a second later, not a movie leap, just a violent collision low and fast that tore the man's balance out from under him. Mara ripped the pistol free and shoved him down hard enough to leave him coughing around the impact. Across the bay, the carrier with the blue box swung once and disappeared through the far service door with its owner attached. Mara caught only a shoulder, a shaved head, and the speed of a man suddenly certain he was being chased by professionals. Maybe he was. The hostage on the floor made a wet sound in his throat. Priorities changed, right there. The rescued man was conscious enough to flinch when Mara dropped beside him, zip-tie marks around one wrist. Injury marked his hairline, one eye swelling shut. Not dying this second. Could start if she guessed wrong. She checked airway, chest rise, pupils, then rolled him just enough to make sure there wasn't a fatal injury on his back. Rook stood over the downed scavenger, chest heaving, waiting for the next command with that terrible, steady focus people mistook for rage. He wasn't angry. He was employed. Mara grabbed the captive's dropped radio and heard nothing but static and one clipped burst of voice farther down the hall. More movement, more distance, opening. The man on the floor coughed and rasped. Blue module. Don't let them crack it. Then pain took the rest. Mara looked toward the far door where the carrier had vanished, then back at the wounded survivor and the clear, ugly geometry of the room around them. Right wall, where she had entered. Left shadow, where Rook had come from. Hostage at the pillar. Far exit lost. They had won one body and lost the initiative. That was the trade. The bad shot had told the whole complex where they were, maybe told half the range. She hauled the survivor upright, shoved the captured pistol into the back of her waistband, and gave the downed scavenger one quick glance. Out cold, maybe concussed. Not her problem yet. Come on, she told the wounded man, more tired than loud. You get to be the good news. Rook cut his eyes toward the far hall, then back to her. The enemy had the blue box, the deeper route, and now their position. Small win, bigger mess. The first warning came up through the ground. Mara felt it in the soles of her boots while she half-dragged, half-steadied the rescued man out the back of the complex, a low vibration that did not belong to gunfire or machinery. The sun still burned clean over the range. No clouds, no mercy. Rook stopped beside her and lifted his head toward the long, shallow cut Eli had pointed out hours earlier. Then the sound arrived, far off and ugly, a rolling growl too steady for thunder and too deep for trucks. Mara kept moving 3 steps before the second shutter hit, stronger now, making loose screws skitter across the concrete lip. She tasted dust and old adrenaline. Heat had baked every smell thin all day. Now the air carried something damp and rotten under it. Mud, wet, clay. Water that had ripped old things loose upstream and was dragging them here. Rook's ears went forward, then flattened. His chest tightened. Mara looked across the open line they had marked as their best way back and felt her gut turn over. The wash was waking up somewhere out of sight, and flash water never needed permission from the sky directly above you. She shoved the rescued man into the strip of shade along the wall and grabbed the short-range radio clipped to his vest. Static first. Then Eli, torn up by distance. Mara, don't take the low line. No panic in it. That made it worse. She keyed once. You seeing water? A burst of hiss. Then, seeing what it'll do. Rook moved before she did. He posted himself between her and the broad, pale crossing. Weight dropped back, one paw scraping as if the ground itself offended him. Root refusal, plain as speech. The easy path outran wide and almost level through the wash cut. It still looked manageable. 6 inches of water at most, threading through the middle. Nothing to a tired eye. Plenty to a moving body if the bottom turned to grease and the current hit from the side. Mara checked the ugly alternative on the right. A steep rise broken by loose rock, rusted drainage hardware, and half-exposed rebar. Bad footing, better odds. The rescued men tried to nod toward the crossing. That way. Shock talking. Mara looked at the surface again and saw the first pebbles twitch. Sand slipping. Tin rattling. Somewhere below the sound that kept growing. Then the mud smell thickened all at once, and the wash started talking in full throat. The flood hit low and fast. Not a towering wall, just a thick, hard surge of brown water carrying sticks, gravel, and enough weight to wreck anybody dumb enough to meet it flat-footed. It spread across the crossing in one violent sheet. Mud slapped rock. Stones clacked under the current. Rusted scrap banged somewhere inside the churn with a hollow iron note that kept surfacing and disappearing. Mara had seen men laugh at shallow water before it took their ankles and turned their knees into hinges. She got the rescued man moving the instant it touched the path, but he slipped anyway, dropping to one knee as the current slapped his thighs and shoved him sideways. Mara caught his harness and nearly went with him. Cold shot up through her boots after a day of furnace heat. The mud under the water moved like muscle, 1 second solid, the next gone. Grit sliced in above her heel and burned. Rook backed uphill without ever taking his eyes off the wash, silent, rigid, right. Eli appeared on the rise to the right, with a cable looped around one hand and an old service post braced beside him. Up, he shouted. Not across. Up. That was it. No speech. Mara changed direction before the flood got a second vote. They climbed the bad route because the good one was dead. Eli came down just far enough to take the rescued man by the vest, and together they hauled him onto the loose incline while the wash filled below with the ugly rushing sound of a problem that had finished pretending to be small. Brown water rolled over itself. Gravel rattled in it. Sticks spun, vanished, and surfaced again. Somewhere, inside the current, something heavy scraped concrete with a long, wet metal groan that set Mara's teeth on edge. Rook went first, claws scrabbling on wet rust, hindquarters bunching hard when the slope broke under him. The cable Eli had rigged went tight across all of them, humming with strain. Ground memory. Logistics, not heroics. Mara kept one shoulder under the rescued man and one hand free to catch herself whenever the hill sloughed away under her boots. Her lungs felt scraped hollow. Sweat turned cold on the back of her neck, while the brown water below swallowed the crossing they had nearly trusted. When they reached the shelf above the wash, Mara looked down and saw the pretty route vanish under moving mud. No going back that way. Maybe no going back at all. Eli spat grit and looked toward the far ridgeline where the last access point sat above the flood cut. High ground, he said. Only play left. Mara checked Rook's breathing, the rescued man's color, the light bleeding down out of the sky. Then she nodded. One more climb. One less safe lie left in the day. The range below kept roaring like it wanted every easy answer back. By late afternoon, the desert had done the strange, cruel thing it did after violence and heat. The air turned cooler by degrees, enough to raise gooseflesh through Mara's sweat-stiff shirt, while the ground still breathed warmth through her boots. The smell had changed, too. Less dust now, more wet clay, cut metal, old machine grease, and the sour tang floodwater left behind when it withdrew and left half the world skinned open. From the shelf above the wash, they could see the final access point on the ridgeline. A half-collapsed service platform welded onto the side of an old maintenance structure. One rail hung broken. One ladder section had torn away. Something moved under the platform, too slow to be wind. Rook stood out in front on a loose line, nose high, working the air from a distance instead of charging in. Standoff search. His ears snapped toward the underside of the structure, then toward a narrow slot of shadow to the left, where the drainage had undercut the base. One living scent where they needed it. Maybe another farther off, moving away. Good enough. Eli lowered the rescued man onto the rocks and crouched by the pack frame he had dragged up from the cutoff point. Cable, hook, keys, a hand winch, older than all of them. 2 in 8 Ks. 8, 8, 8. Mara watched the platform sway once in the breeze and saw a boot hanging below it. Not empty, not for long. Nobody gave a speech. They had all run out of spare oxygen for that. Eli pointed with 2 fingers, then with the winch handle, anchor point on the service stub, root for the cable. His eyes asked the only real question: pull or climb? Mara lay flat at the lip and studied the body under the platform before she answered. Male, conscious maybe fading. One leg trapped between twisted rail and a bent support brace. Dark stain on the thigh, not actively flowing now, but too much of it gone already. Left arm tucked wrong under him. Chest moving shallow and fast. If Eli hauled him straight up by the torso, the trapped leg might tear worse and finish the bleed. If Mara climbed down first, the whole platform might shed another piece and dump both of them into the cut below. She measured angles, the flex in the metal, the distance to the brace, the color in the man's lips. Short lift first, she said. 3 inches, maybe 4. Just enough to buy the legroom. Then I go. Eli nodded once and started rigging without wasting time, pretending he had a better plan. The hook went to the service stub with one hard metallic knock. Cable unspooled in dry, rasping loops, then tightened as he fed it under the remaining rail. Rook moved to the left shadow and locked there, body still, head fixed downrange, cover in his own language. Mara trusted that more than most men with rifles. The first turn of the winch handle sounded too loud in the cooling air, steel clicking over steel. A hard ratchet bite. Another. Eli braced, with his bad knee half bent, and his whole back set like a load-bearing wall. The cable drew tight, then tighter, humming so hard Mara could feel it through the platform. The trapped man made a sound that landed somewhere between a grunt and a prayer. The rail lifted. Mara went down fast while it held. One boot on the rung, one hand on the hot metal edge, body tucked close because there was no room for style. Up close, the casualty looked worse. Gray skin, tremor in the jaw, pulse fluttering at the neck, like something trying to leave. She got a tourniquet high on the leg with movements so economical they felt mean, cinched until the bleeding changed character, then jammed her shoulder under the rail and shouted, "More!" Eli gave her one more crank. 3 inches. Enough. Mara yanked the trapped leg free, nearly lost her own footing when the platform lurched, then shoved the man upward by the vest and belt while Eli hauled from above. The winch clicked, bit, and clicked again. Cable sang under load. Metal protested in short, sharp notes. Rook exploded once, not with a bark, but with a violent charge to the edge of his line, staring into the left slot. Warning. Somebody or something had shifted out there. Mara did not look. She got the casualty onto the deck and climbed after him, with her forearms burning and her right palm reopened where the stolen pistol had scraped it earlier. Once they had him on solid metal, the rescue turned back into medicine. Mara cut cloth, checked chest rise, found the bad fracture in the arm, found the severe trauma in the leg, and accepted in one cold sweep that this was the kind of save that kept a person alive without giving anything back clean. "He lives if we move now," she said. "He doesn't walk this off. Ever." Eli just nodded, and re-rigged the cable for descent while breathing through his teeth. His face had gone old around the eyes. Rook came back from the line limping, almost too little to notice, pads heated, one paw muddy to the wrist, flanks pumping hard. Mara gave him one fast touch at the neck, everything that mattered compressed into skin and pressure. Good dog, good partner, still working. The final casualty opened one eye and tried to focus on them like he could not believe this was the team he got. Then shock took most of him again. Below, the wash kept muttering in the dark. The sky had gone hard and colorless. They had the men. They had no clean version of the story, no clean bodies, no clean route home, only proof. Eli tightened the last line. Mara checked the dressings once more. Rook shifted his weight off the sore paw and stayed standing anyway. The physical storm was done. The paperwork storm was waiting back at the gate. The air in Voss's office was cold enough to feel personal. After a day spent inside heat and glare and wet mud and blood, the steady hiss from the vent sounded obscene, like the building had saved its mercy for paperwork. Mara sat in the hard chair across from his desk, with Rook angled against her shin, one paw resting in her lap. The dog had finally stopped working and started shaking in little buried pulses that ran through the muscle under his coat. She poured water over a clean pad and worked mud out from between his toes, one careful pass at a time. The pads were abraded raw in two places, one edge split where grit and rust had chewed him on the climb. He did not pull away. He just watched her with that exhausted, level look working dogs had when they were done pretending they were made of iron. Her own right palm stung every time she flexed it. The scrape from the pistol had dried, cracked, opened again. The cinnamon gum in her mouth had gone flat an hour ago, all bark and no sweetness. Voss stood by the filing cabinet instead of sitting, jacket off, sleeves rolled once, as if looking operational might save him from what was coming. It did not. The office smelled of toner, cold air, antiseptic, and the faint stale coffee note of people who believed paper could redeem timing. Mara finished taping Rook's paw, set it down gently, and slid the first report across the desk. Trauma summary, casualty sequence, mechanism of injury, timing. The paper made a dry, sharp sound against the wood, louder in that office than it had any right to be. Voss looked at the top page, then the next, then at the photo print clip behind them. The handler's arm, the utility cage, the crushed panel, the lane dressed to look clean, the wash crossing swallowed by brown water. Nothing dramatic in the images. That was the problem. Real damage never needed dramatic. "You're making a straight line out of a bad afternoon," he said finally. His voice had gone smaller since the range. Not softer, smaller. Mara peeled the blood-stiff tape off her own palm with her teeth, cleaned the cut with the last of the bottled water, and did not help him. "No," she said. "I'm making a record out of the line that was already there." He said nothing to that. She watched his eyes track back to the timestamps. First, report pressure, delayed expansion, limited authorization, search, scope restriction, each one reasonable by itself. Together, fatal enough to leave a permanent mark. The second packet was worse, and he knew it before she put it down. Safety log, discrepancies, manual access breach, missing turnover confirmation, range, condition, conflict with posted lane status. Attached medical notes establishing the first injury had been misclassified before anyone had bothered to verify mechanism. Mara laid that stack on top of the first and flattened her sore hand against it for a second, feeling the cheap heat of the printer paper still trapped near the staples. The paperwork had weight. It had edge. It had the clean deadliness of a blade nobody noticed until it was already in. "This goes to review," she said. "Training command. Safety. Whoever gets paid to ask why a live site got treated like an inconvenience." Voss's jaw moved once. He looked at the door, the vent, the desk, anywhere but the paper. Cornered men always did that, not searching for escape. Searching for a version of themselves they could still live with after the language turned official. "I contained what I had," he said. Mara almost laughed, but there was no energy left in it. "You contained the wrong thing." That landed. She saw it in the twitch under his left eye, the breath he took and then put back. No apology came. Good. Apologies were for people who still thought tone changed consequences. He sat at last, picked up the top page, and signed the acknowledgement line with a hand steady enough to make it worse. Exact cost lived there now. Audit exposure. Failure to escalate. Review trail. Not justice. Paper. When it was done, the office went quiet in a hard mechanical way, the vent hissing above them, the fluorescent ballast ticking once in the ceiling. Mara capped the antiseptic, rubbed one hand over Rook's neck, and felt him lean into her leg for the first time all day. Across the desk, Voss stacked the pages with excessive care, squaring corners that could not be unsquared from the record. He looked tired enough to age into somebody else, but that did not buy him absolution. It barely bought him silence. Mara reached into her pocket for a fresh piece of cinnamon gum, thought better of it, and let the wrapper sit unopened in her fist. Her private rule moved through her again, not dramatic, not sacred, just true, in the plain, ugly way truth usually arrived. Don't ever let the first explanation become the operating truth. That was all this had been from the start. A room wanting the fast answer, a system wanting the neat answer, a range dressed up to lie, people saved anyway, but not all the way. A blue box stolen for reasons uglier than scrap, a captain more afraid of process failure on paper than failure in motion, right up until paper turned into the thing that would cut him open. She rose with stiffness pulling at her shoulders and her reopened palm burning under the tape. Rook stood too, favoring the wrapped paw and staying close. Mara left the reports on Voss's desk, left the cold air, left the silence to finish the job it had started. Behind her, the paper stayed where it was. So would the mark.